Sacred geometry has long been celebrated as the hidden architecture of creation, a mysterious language said to reveal the deep order of the cosmos. It is spoken of as the bridge between the material and the divine, a key to higher awareness, and a gateway into realms beyond ordinary perception. Yet what if this key could also be turned in the opposite direction? What if certain patterns, instead of liberating the soul, were crafted to hold it in place, to trap rather than to free? This video explores that tension, the dual nature of symbols that appear radiant and holy on the surface, but can also function as invisible cages. For thousands of years, seekers have revered geometric patterns as sacred, yet the same forms can be inverted, distorted, or employed with intentions that bind instead of elevate. What is often presented as purely divine may also conceal a darker application, one that shapes human consciousness in ways we seldom notice. It is important to be clear from the beginning. This exploration is not a final verdict or a rigid declaration of truth. It is an investigation into esoteric traditions and symbolic practices, many of which are cloaked in mystery, secrecy, and interpretation. The purpose is not to convince, but to provoke thought, to suggest that symbols, especially those called sacred, carry more than one face. Sacred geometry is often described as the blueprint of creation, the mathematical fabric underlying everything from the spirals of galaxies to the shells of ocean creatures. The elegance of the golden ratio, the perfect symmetry of platonic solids, and the repeating circles of the flower of life all seem to whisper of a hidden order that unites spirit and matter. These patterns are not random. They are the very structures upon which reality is built, and for this reason, they have always been regarded as divine. Yet to treat them as inherently good is to misunderstand their power. A symbol is never neutral. It is always activated by intention. A geometric form can serve as a ladder, helping consciousness ascend into broader states of awareness, or it can act as a chain, subtly guiding perception into a closed loop. The same shape can inspire awe or enforce control, depending entirely on the purpose of the one who wields it. A circle, for example, can symbolize wholeness, unity, and eternity, but it can also become a boundary, a closed container, a wall that keeps energy from escaping. This principle of inversion lies at the heart of esoteric practice. Every tool of light has a shadowed reflection. The triangle pointing upward is a symbol of fire, aspiration, and ascent, yet the triangle pointing downward is its inversion, representing descent, grounding, and sometimes entrapment. A star can be the emblem of celestial guidance, but turn its angles in the opposite direction, and it becomes a mark of restriction and binding. What appears divine to the untrained eye can, in another context, function as a prison of consciousness. The recognition of this dual nature is crucial, for it frees us from blind devotion to form. Geometry itself is pure, but its application is not. Just as music can heal or disturb depending on the harmony it carries, so too can symbols either liberate or confine depending on how they are used. To understand sacred geometry, one must therefore hold both possibilities in mind, that the same pattern that opens a door may also lock it. Throughout history, sacred geometry has not simply floated as abstract beauty. It has been held, guarded, and strategically employed by those who understood its potency. Ancient priesthoods, mystery schools, and secret orders did not merely revere geometry as a spiritual key, they also concealed it, restricting access to its principles and reserving its deeper applications for the initiated few. This secrecy was not only about preserving the sanctity of the knowledge, but also about wielding power over those who remained outside the circle. To know the geometry was to know the mechanisms of reality, and with that knowledge came influence over how others lived, worshipped, and even thought. Consider the temples of Egypt, where geometry was not just decorative but structural, shaping the very resonance of the space. The dimensions of columns, the proportions of inner chambers, and the orientation of the pyramids were all informed by geometric principles that magnified energy. Worshippers entering such spaces were not simply admiring architecture. They were stepping into an energetic container, one that directed their awareness upward toward the divine, or, depending on how the space was tuned, one that bound their devotion in service to the priesthood that controlled the temple. The building itself became a ritual object, a geometric machine that gathered and focused human attention. In Greece, Pythagoras and his followers treated number and shape as the keys to cosmic order, yet even their school operated in layers of secrecy. The outer circle of students received teachings that uplifted and inspired, but the inner circle guarded formulas and diagrams that were considered too powerful to disclose widely. Similar patterns can be found in the esoteric orders of the Middle Ages and Renaissance, where geometric knowledge was wrapped in allegory, coded in art, and hidden within manuscripts. Those who carried the symbols also carried the ability to manipulate collective belief and to shape the energetic landscape of entire societies. Beyond architecture and philosophy, geometry also appeared in the form of talismans, seals, and ritual diagrams. These were not merely symbolic, they were seen as containers of power. A carefully drawn figure could act as a channel, summoning or binding energies, anchoring spirits, or locking intention into physical reality. Some of these designs were protective, meant to shield or bless, but others were crafted specifically to bind, to tether a soul, or to capture energy for the one who activated the seal. In this sense, sacred geometry became a weapon, a tool of magical control, disguised as divine symbolism. Thus, when we speak of sacred geometry in history, we must see it not as a neutral science of beauty, but as a double-edged instrument of influence. It was at once a ladder toward illumination and a chain of subtle domination. The same spirals and stars carved into temple walls could elevate the initiate while entrapping the unknowing. Those who held the codes of geometry held not only the appearance of holiness, but also the power to shape the invisible architecture of human consciousness. If we accept that sacred geometry is not inherently benevolent, then we must begin to distinguish between the ways it can liberate and the ways it can ensnare. This requires moving beyond the surface-level reverence for patterns and looking deeper at how they function energetically. A liberating pattern is not simply one that looks beautiful or feels inspiring. It is one that opens pathways in consciousness, that invites expansion rather than restriction, that helps the mind and spirit transcend habitual loops of thought and perception. In contrast, a binding pattern is one that closes the circuit, looping awareness back into itself, trapping energy rather than allowing it to flow freely toward higher dimensions of being. The flower of life is often presented as one of the most liberating of these patterns. It appears across cultures, from ancient Egypt to medieval cathedrals, and it carries within it the seed of countless other geometries. Within its interlocking circles lies the structure of the Platonic solids, the star tetrahedron, and even the molecular patterns that underlie living organisms. For those who work with it consciously, the flower of life becomes a reminder of interconnectedness, a map of the unity that underlies diversity. When meditated upon with awareness, it encourages the soul to recognize its place within the infinite web of creation, dissolving illusions of separation. The Merkaba, another liberating symbol, represents the interlocking tetrahedra that form a star-like shape. In mystical traditions, it is described as a light-body vehicle, a geometric form that can transport consciousness into higher states of awareness. Working with the Merkaba is said to activate the subtle body, harmonizing spirit and matter, allowing the individual to move beyond the confines of ordinary physical experience. Similarly, the Sri Yantra, composed of interlacing triangles, is revered in the Indian tradition as a gateway to the cosmos and a tool for meditation that aligns the practitioner with the divine feminine and masculine principles of the universe. Each of these symbols, when approached with mindfulness, can lift awareness out of limitation and into a space of expansive freedom. But for every pattern that liberates, there are others that function in the opposite way. Some geometric forms are deliberately incomplete, designed to mimic the resonance of a true sacred figure, but with key distortions that create energetic cages. Instead of opening into infinity, they fold energy inward, locking it into cycles that never escape their own repetition. Certain seals and talismans, for instance, were not crafted to inspire transcendence, but to anchor the spirit, to bind it to a ritual, a contract, or even a controlling entity. Grids that loop energy back onto itself can create what might be called spiritual feedback loops, where the soul's natural movement toward freedom is caught in a net. This is the essence of an energetic cage. To the untrained eye, such a pattern may appear just as divine as a liberating one. Its symmetry may be pleasing, its proportions may echo familiar ratios, and it may even be presented under the guise of holiness. Yet instead of serving as a doorway, it acts as a trap, keeping energy confined within a limited resonance. The difference lies not in superficial appearance, but in how the geometry channels flow. Does it move consciousness outward into expansion, or does it redirect it inward, looping endlessly without release? This is why discernment is so critical. Symbols are not merely aesthetic. They are machines of consciousness, shaping the way energy moves. The flower of life, the Merkaba, and the Sri Yantra can open awareness, but only if they are engaged with consciously. Likewise, a binding seal can exert influence only if it is given energy, whether through belief, repetition, or unconscious attention. Liberation and imprisonment are not fixed qualities of the shapes themselves, but dynamic possibilities that depend on both the design of the pattern and the awareness of the one interacting with it. To understand how symbols can actually bind the soul, we need to look more closely at how consciousness interacts with pattern. Every geometric form is not just a picture. It is a frequency, a vibration frozen into shape. When the mind or the spirit encounters a pattern, whether in a drawing, in architecture, or in a symbol charged with intention, it does not remain passive. It resonates with the form, aligning itself with the rhythm encoded within the geometry. This resonance can either free the spirit into wider frequencies of being or entrap it in a repeating cycle. Imagine a spiral that moves outward infinitely. To follow its rhythm is to be drawn into expansion, to move beyond the limits of what is known. Now, imagine a spiral that folds inward upon itself, collapsing into a tight center that never releases. That spiral still feels compelling. It still draws consciousness along its path. But the journey ends not in freedom, but in entrapment. In the same way, certain patterns lead the soul into open horizons, while others redirect awareness into a self-reinforcing loop. This is how a symbol becomes an energetic prison. It seduces the mind into tracing its lines again and again without ever finding the doorway out. Repeating patterns are particularly effective for this. When the eye or the mind follows a form that doubles back upon itself, consciousness is pulled into a rhythm that feels complete but is actually closed. The repetition creates a kind of hypnotic effect, where awareness is lulled into moving endlessly along the same track. What begins as harmony can become stagnation, for the vibration of the symbol sets the boundaries of thought and experience. Instead of lifting the individual into new frequencies, it locks them into a narrow band, a feedback loop where growth halts. Resonance is the key mechanism here. Every symbol carries a vibrational imprint, and when it is engaged with, whether gazed upon, meditated upon, or even unconsciously absorbed, the human field begins to attune to that vibration. A liberating symbol holds a frequency that encourages openness, alignment, and movement beyond self-imposed limits. A binding symbol holds a frequency that narrows, confines, and restricts. In both cases, the effect is not superficial, but deeply energetic, shaping the currents of thought and emotion at levels that often bypass conscious awareness. But perhaps the most important factor is intent. A triangle is not dangerous in itself, nor is a circle automatically liberating. What matters is the purpose with which the geometry is activated. A talisman inscribed with a pattern may lie dormant, but when it is charged with will, when it is used in ritual or given belief, it becomes alive. The symbol then begins to function as a vessel of the Creator's intent. If the intention is to elevate, the pattern becomes a ladder. If the intention is to control or to trap, the pattern becomes a cage. This is why geometry in the hands of secret orders, priesthoods, or even modern institutions has such influence. It is not just the shape itself, but the will invested into the shape that matters. A star carved into a temple wall becomes more than decoration because it has been consecrated with ritual. A seal etched into parchment becomes more than ink because it has been empowered with intent. Consciousness, once directed into the form, animates the geometry, giving it the ability to shape the fields of others who come into contact with it. The mechanics of soul binding are therefore not mystical in the sense of being unknowable. They follow a clear logic. Geometry sets the pattern. Resonance carries the vibration. Intention activates the form. Together, these elements create structures that can either liberate the human spirit or confine it. What appears to be a simple design may, in fact, be an energetic engine humming beneath perception, guiding awareness into freedom, or locking it in a prison that feels sacred, but is, in truth, a cage made of light. If sacred geometry can operate as both a liberating force and a binding mechanism, then the most important skill a seeker can develop is discernment. The first step is learning to recognize when a symbol, a space, or a pattern is nourishing the spirit, and when it is draining it. This recognition does not come from intellectual analysis alone. It arises from paying attention to how the body, the emotions, and the mind respond in the presence of the geometry. When standing before a liberating pattern, whether it is the flower of life etched into stone or the Sri Yantra laid out in a temple, the sensation is one of openness. The breath deepens without effort. Thought begins to quiet, and a subtle spaciousness fills the awareness. The energy feels expansive, as though the mind has been invited into a larger reality. By contrast, when one encounters a binding form, there is often a subtle tightening. The eyes may feel compelled to keep tracing the same lines, the body may feel slightly restless, or the mind may feel caught in repetitive loops of thought. The overall sense is not one of expansion, but of contraction, not of freedom, but of entrapment. These effects are often subtle, which is why many pass by such symbols without realizing the effect they are having. But with practice, sensitivity develops. One can begin to notice which logos, designs, or architectural spaces leave them feeling light and clear, and which leave them feeling drained or oddly restless. This sensitivity is not paranoia. It is awareness, a reclaiming of the ability to feel the unseen currents that geometry channels. Once a draining or binding pattern is recognized, the question becomes how to neutralize its effect. The simplest method is to withdraw attention. Symbols feed on focus. They are activated when energy is given to them, whether through belief, ritual, or even casual fixation. By choosing not to engage, one cuts off the fuel that keeps the pattern alive. Another approach is to cleanse the space, whether physically, by removing objects, altering the arrangement of a room, or stepping outside the architecture, or energetically, by using practices such as sound, breath, or visualization to dissolve the resonance the symbol has created. For those who wish to go further, there is the practice of reclamation, consciously using geometry to expand awareness rather than confine it. This may involve working with liberating forms such as the Merkaba or the Sri Yantra in meditation, allowing their resonance to train the mind toward openness. It may also mean creating new patterns, drawing or visualizing shapes that feel alive and expansive, and imprinting them with one's own intention of freedom. In this way, geometry ceases to be something imposed from outside and becomes an ally, a tool that the seeker can use deliberately to align with higher frequencies. Breaking the spell is not about rejecting all symbols or fearing every pattern encountered in daily life. It is about developing the discernment to know which patterns uplift and which bind, and reclaiming the agency to choose how one interacts with them. The same triangle that has been used in rituals of control can be reactivated with the intention of liberation. The same circle that has served as a container can be redrawn as a mandala of infinite openness. Geometry itself is neutral. It is the awareness and intent of the individual that determines whether it becomes a key or a cage. In the end, the act of recognition and reclamation restores what has too often been surrendered: the sovereignty of the soul. When one learns to see through the glamour of symbols, when one feels their resonance directly and chooses consciously how to respond, then the hidden power of geometry no longer belongs to priests, orders, corporations, or architects. It belongs once again to the individual, who can walk among patterns without being bound by them, who can see the cage for what it is and step beyond it.